So as we were doing A Face in the Dark by Ruskin Bond, we know that this is a story about Mr. Oliver, who lives in the premises of his school where he teaches, which was run on English public lines. And it was a daily routine for him to go out to the Simla Bazaar in the evening, and he would return after dark. And he would take a shortcut through the pine forest, and he would come back to school. But this particular day, something strange happened. And as he was coming back from the market, he again took the forest path, narrow forest path. And today, the batteries of the torch were almost running out, and the light of the torch was flickering, right? Like it was kind of turning on and off. And this flickering light of the torch, it fell on a figure which Mr. Oliver uh, assumed to be a boy who was sitting on the rock. Now, the first thought that came to Mr. Oliver's mind was that this was a schoolboy and he's not supposed to be out after dark, according to the discipline of the school, right? So we'll proceed further. He asks, "What are you doing out here, boy?" So now, being a school teacher, it was his responsibility to like ask that why was he outside of the school at this hour. So he goes up to the boy and he asks that, "What are you doing here, boy?" Asked Mr. Oliver sharply, moving closer so that he could recognize the miscreant. Miscreant is like a mischievous boy, someone who is out to do some mischief. So like obviously when he's out in the dark, he is up to some mischief. He's a naughty child. So he moves closer to recognize that which naughty child is this, right? So like when you people do something, I pin your videos and take a closer look. So similarly, Mr. Oliver also went up to that boy, because in the dark he couldn't make out from far away that who is it. So he went closer to see that, to recognize who was this boy. But even as he approached the boy, Mr. Oliver sensed that something was wrong. So as he approached that boy, somehow Mr. Oliver had this feeling that something was wrong, right? Something was like unusual, right? So he felt this thing. Now, Ruskin Bond, you can see, is very good at setting up the atmosphere. He is creating a suspense when he says that he sensed that something was wrong. Now, what could be wrong in this? A boy sitting there on the rock in the forest, but he is like creating a suspense by these words that Mr. Oliver sensed that something was wrong, something was unusual, right? So now suddenly a feeling of fear and suspense would come in the minds of the readers, right? The boy appeared to be crying. Now, what was wrong? This boy was not like sitting normally, but he was crying. His head hung down. He held his face in his hands. His body shook convulsively, right? Convulsively, like moved suddenly. So he was shaking a lot. His body was shaking. He appeared to be crying. He had his head hung down, right? And he hid his, like you people put your hands, you cover your face with your hands and lower down your head and you cry. So similarly, that boy was also doing, was in that same posture. He had hung his head down and he covered his face with his hands, and he was crying, and his body was shaking. All right. So you can see the repeated use of H over here. His head hung, and then he held his face, right? So this is use of alliteration, right? So now Mr. Oliver could observe that this boy was crying. It was a strange, soundless weeping, and Mr. Oliver felt distinctly uneasy. So now uh, it was like the boy was not sitting normally, he was crying, and that crying was also not usual. It was a strange, soundless weeping. Weeping is when you like cry out loud, right? But it is soundless, right? He's crying, he's weeping, but it is soundless. He's not making any sound. And it's very strange. The weeping is strange. So again, there is repeated use of the consonant sound S, right? So it was a strange, soundless weeping, and Mr. Oliver felt distinctly uneasy. So now he was like uncomfortable with that. In that moment, he felt very uncomfortable. He felt uneasy. Well, what's the matter? He asked. So he asked the boy that what is the matter? His anger giving way to concern. At first, he was angry when he saw the boy outside of the school at this hour. So he was very angry. But now, when he saw this boy crying and shaking in a very strange manner, his anger like went away. And what came in place of it? Concern. Now he was very concerned for the boy, that what is the matter with this boy? Why is this boy crying so much? Right? So you can say that he is a very kind-hearted person. He is like, your teachers are always worried about you. So similarly, he is also a teacher. If that child is a boy from his school, so he also is worried about him, that why is he crying? What is the matter? Has something happened? Has some accident taken place? What is the matter, right? So he got worried about him, and his anger went away and concern took its place. Why, what are you crying for? So he's asking that boy that what are you crying for? What has happened? The boy would not answer or look up. So he kept on asking that what are you doing here? What is the matter? What are you crying for? But like all these questions were going into vain. That boy did not answer to his questions, or neither did he, nor did he look up, right? His body continued to be ragged with silent sobbing, right? Again, the consonant sound of S has been repeated over here. Silent sobbing. Please keep underlining it, right? You can also encircle the words like this, so that when you read, you will understand that an alliteration has been used, right? His body continued to be ragged means uh, means disturbed or tortured, right? So his body was continuously shaking and being disturbed because of that crime, right? Uh, to rack someone means to like cause pain to someone, all right? So his body was being pained because of that silent sobbing. All right. So the boy did not answer or did not look up. He continued to be in pain and he continued to cry. Come on, boy, you shouldn't be out there. So now Mr. Oliver is saying that, come on, boy, you shouldn't be out there at this time, right? I can see some of the videos are off. Turn them on. All right, so you shouldn't be out here. Tell me the trouble, look up. So he's saying that what is the matter with you? Tell me what is bothering you, what is the trouble, and look up at me, right? He wants to see that who's that boy. So he's saying that look up. The boy looked up. So when he said look up, then the boy looked up. He took his hands from his face. So he had his head hung down, so he lifted his head and then he removed the hands from over his face and looked up at his teacher. So that boy looked up at his teacher. The light from Mr. Oliver's torch fell on the boy's face. So because it was dark, Mr. Oliver couldn't have recognized him in the dark. So he put the light of the torch on the boy's face, and as the light fell on the boy, if you could call it a face, the light of the torch fell on the boy's face, but hardly you could call it a face. Why can you not call it a face? Because it had no eyes, ears, nose, or mouth. So that boy did not have any eyes, it did not have any ears, it did not have any nose or a mouth. It was just a round, smooth head. All right. So it did not have any features. It was just this round, smooth head present without any of the organs that are usually there on a face. That is why it is said that, you could hardly call it a face, with a school cap on top of it. So it was like a just round thing with a cap placed on top. But for Mr. Oliver, it did not end here. So this was a terrible, terrible sight. But Mr. Oliver's encounter did not end over here. What happened next? The torch fell from his trembling hand. So now, why trembling? Because Mr. Oliver got terrified because of that sight. Obviously, anyone would get terrified. You are encountering a faceless boy in the middle of the jungle late at night. So what happened? Mr. Oliver got so terrified that his hands started trembling or shaking with fear. And because of that, the torch fell from his hands. So you can see how the atmosphere is intensifying, right? Now he had this light of the torch that was already flickering, but he has lost it even that now, right? He has even lost that. He turned and scrambled down the path. Scrambled means like run for life, move with in panic, right? When you are in a very panic state and you try to run away, that is referred to as scramble. So he ran for his life. He turned and quickly started running down the path, running blindly through the trees. Why blindly? Because now he was not seeing in which direction he is going. He just kept on running in whichever direction he could, calling for help. He called out for help. That is there anyone, please help me, right? To come out of this particular situation. He didn't know, he couldn't understand how to react. He was so terrified. He was still running towards the school buildings when he saw a lantern. So he started running in the direction of the school, right? So he towards to the direction in which the school building was, and he ran quickly in that direction. And as he was running in that direction, what happened? He saw a lantern swinging in the middle of the path. So now this is again something very strange. A lantern swinging by itself in the middle of the path. So this is something very strange, right? Mr. Oliver stumbled up to the watchman, gasping for breath. So now, as he was running very fast, he came and he stumbled into a watchman, and he had run so fast that he could hardly breathe. Mr. Oliver was gasping for breath, right? He was like, when you run very fast, after that it becomes hard for you to breathe, right? You want to catch your breath, come to the make it come to the normal rate. So he was also gasping for breath. What is it, Sahib? Asked the watchman. So the watchman saw the state of Mr. Oliver and asked that, what is it, Sahib? What is the matter? Has there been an accident? Why are you running? So looking at the state of Mr. Oliver, the watchman could make out that something is wrong. And he asked that, what is it? Has there been an accident? Why are you running in this way? I saw something horrible. A boy weeping in the forest. Now, these hyphens have been placed to show that Mr. Oliver was kind of stammering. He was so terrified that he could hardly speak, right? He is speaking in broken sentences. He could hardly speak out of fear, right? I saw something horrible. A boy weeping in the forest, and he had no face. So I saw something very horrible in the forest. There was a boy weeping, and that boy had no face. No face, Sahib? So the watchman is asking that, what are you saying? The boy had no face, right? No eyes, nose, mouth, nothing. So Mr. Oliver is saying that, yes, no, by no face, I mean he did not have eyes, he did not have mouth, he did not have nose. There was nothing present on his face. Do you mean like it was like this, Sahib. So at this, the watchman replies that, do you mean that it was like this? Asked the watchman and raised the lamp to his own face. That means the watchman was also a faceless man, right? He said that you are saying no face. So was it like this? And he lifted that lantern that was hanging in the path. He lifted that lamp to his face so that the light fell on the face of the watchman. The watchman had no eyes, no ears, no features at all, not even an eyebrow, right? So he was like, he was also in that way only. He also did not have any of the features of the face. And that's when the wind blew the lamp out. So like it just did not end over here. It was at this moment when the lamp's light also went off because the wind blew away the lamp. And here Ruskin Bond ends the story, leaving it to the reader's imagination that what would have happened to Mr. Oliver next, whether he was able to escape that situation or he got caught in it, whether he was able to reach the school building or not, that is left up to readers' imagination. So that is a very kind of interesting ending as well, that he has not like given a proper ending to the story. He ends it at a mysterious situation, leaving it to the reader's imagination whether Mr. Oliver could escape the situation or not, right? So when the author says, when the narrator says that it did not end for Mr. Oliver here, it actually did not end even at the end of the story, right? Because what happened next is not known, right? So first he encountered that faceless boy, and when he reached this watchman, he must have hoped for some help from this watchman, but he also turned out to be a faceless man, and he had lost his torch, and this lamp that was there in the middle of the path also blew out because of the wind, right? So there was complete darkness, and what happened next is not known. So this is your story. I'll show you a video now regarding this story. Right, so this is the story about that it ended very suddenly, right? In a very mysterious situation, leaving it to the author's reader's imagination to think that what would have happened next, right? Now we move on to the critical appreciation of the story. Talking about the title, the story A Face in the Dark is a strange tale as suggested by its title. The title itself seems very strange, A Face in the Dark, right? So Mr. Oliver, the character in the story, was going back to his school at night. You know the entire story, right? The boy does not reply and how things turned out to be. So when he's encountered that boy in the forest, he was supposed to look up, right? And Mr. Oliver wanted to recognize his face, that who is this boy? But that boy did not have a face. There were no eyes. The main emphasis lays on this fact itself. Why was Mr. Oliver terrified? Because that boy did not have a face, right? And when calling out for help, he ran from that place and stumbled into the watchman. He saw that the watchman also was without a face, right? A person being without a face. So he encounters people in that forest, but actually these people who appeared to be having a face did not actually have it when seen in light. Earlier, when light was not like falling on the face of the boy, that boy also seemed to be like having a face, being a proper boy, but actually when it came to light, it was revealed that he had no face. The watchman was also there and he seemed to be a proper man, but when light fell on him, he also seemed to be without a face, right? So Ruskin Bond says that after dark, we see or hear many things that seem mysterious or irrational, and then by the light of the day we find that magic and mystery have an explanation after all, right? A face in the dark is quite appropriate as it makes the readers ponder upon the mysteries of human existence and possibility of another layer of life outside our material world, right? So Ruskin Bond, it's not like Ruskin Bond believed in ghost stories. All right, it was not that. He just want to say that, after dark, or when you are not having complete knowledge of certain thing, that thing might seem very mysterious or unusual to you. But when light falls on that thing, or when that thing is seen in the light of the day, then what happens that we find that there is a scientific explanation to each and every thing, right? And because Mr. Oliver was encountering faces in the dark, in that forest, but when light fell on them, he actually saw that these people were without faces. So this title, A Face in the Dark, is quite appropriate for the story, because the entire story deals about it, right? That Mr. Oliver got terrified because the people that he encountered in the forest were faceless, right? And hence the title, A Face in the Dark, right? All right, talking about the character, Mr. Oliver was an Anglo-Indian teacher. Now, he has been termed as being a bachelor and staying alone in the school premises. Now, this is very important. Underline. All right. So this is important. You will see, we will talk about it. Why is it important when we do the theme and all, right? So you underline it. It's an important, why this information has been provided to you is important. Like, what was the need to mention that Mr. Oliver was a bachelor, right? But it has been provided, this information, so it is important, right? We will talk about it ahead, all right, later on. So you just underline it that he was a bachelor and he was probably staying alone in the school premises. Obviously, he would stay alone because he's not going to stay with the boys, right? They are his students. So he was staying separately, right? He used to walk down every evening to the Shimla Bazaar and would return after dark by taking a shortcut through the pine forest. The traits that we can talk about is that he was a courageous man. He did not believe in imaginary or ghost stories, right? He never felt any fear while walking through the pine forest at night. It was a normal routine for him. Had he been afraid, why would he come from that path every day, right? So he was not afraid. He would like normally come back every day from that path without being afraid, right? The weather, even when the weather was windy and the pine trees would make sad and eerie sounds, it wouldn't bother him. Once, while walking through the forest at night, he saw a boy sitting alone on the rock from his. Then, too, he was like not scared. When he saw a boy sitting at night, he was not scared. Instead, he was surprised to see, and like being a teacher, feeling responsibility for that boy, he first becomes angry. But then, when he saw that he was like crying and he was shaking, so his anger went away and now he was concerned for that child, right? So being a teacher, he had concern for his children, right? So you can say that he is a good man who knows his responsibilities and he cares for his students, right? And then he continuously keeps on asking the boy that what was the trouble, why was he worried, what is the matter. He kept asking that and then asks the boy to look up, right? But when the boy's face, he saw that the boy's face was featureless, then he got horrified, right? Because a person who had never believed in something like ghosts or supernatural power was now in the grip of an unknown fear and ran for safety. Right now, this was something that he could not comprehend that what was happening. Right, he could not have believed or thought that such a thing can ever occur to him. But now, when it actually happened to him, he could not understand, he could not comprehend that how it was happening, what should he do, right? So some unknown fear gripped him. This term unknown fear is important, all right? Unknown fear gripped him and he ran for his safety. Underline it, right? That he was in the grip of an unknown fear. And when he bumped into the watchman, he saw that he was also featureless like the boy, right? So again, maybe he was pacified for a second that fine, I have found someone for help. But then that hope also went away when he saw that watchman was also faceless, right? So this author has ended the story here without telling what might have happened to Oliver. Seeing from the point of view that Oliver had been using the same route for several years, it can be interfered that he might have fainted for some time. Like, this is your own opinion, right? That like I said, that it has been left up to the to the readers that what they consider that might have happened. It's just a possibility that he might have fainted for some time. Why? Because this was something very unusual, and he was almost gasping for breath by just encountering that boy. And now, when the watchman also turned out to be faceless, he might have fainted with fear, right? And he might have, once he regained consciousness, he might have given a serious thought to the issue of ghosts and supernatural beings. Means it would be like a very tough for him, for someone who did not believe in ghosts, to deny them anymore, right? Like, if I say that ghosts do not exist and I myself encounter a ghost, and then will I be able to say any further in future that ghosts do not exist, right? I won't be able to say. I would give it a second thought that do they exist, or it was just my imagination, right? I will have to give a second thought to it. So similarly, it is said that Mr. Oliver must have given a serious thought to this issue, that whether ghosts and supernatural beings exist or not. However, it can be inferred that due to living alone, Oliver might be feeling lonely, and therefore he was caught in the grip of some psychological fears that gave rise to these imaginary faceless creatures roaming in the pine forest at night. So when I said that he is a bachelor and he was living alone is important, and he's in the grip of unknown fear is important, now we are giving another layer to these things, that he might have been, it might have been that these things actually did not happen. It was just his imagination, because he used to stay alone, because he was lonely, and he might have been caught in the grip of some psychological fear. Staying alone for several years is not an easy thing, right? We need to have a family, right? We need to have friends. We need to talk about things to our family and friends, right? So not having anyone with him to share his goods and bad, he was caught in some psychological fear that gave rise to these imaginary faceless figures. Like, it was just his own imagination and not the truth, right? It might have been his imagination, like, right? So this can also be a possibility, right? Because we know that Ruskin Bond did not actually believe in ghosts. He could not have written a story that had actual ghosts in it, right? So we can say that it must have been his own imagination and not real ghosts walking about or real figures walking about in the forest. All right. I'll stop here for today. Theme and all I'll discuss in the next class. All right.